Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases recorded in American history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. In the shadow of the Appalachian Mountains, nestled within the dense forests of McDowell County, West Virginia, lies the forgotten mining town of Welch. This once thriving community built on coal and timber stands as a silent witness to one of the most perplexing cold cases in American history. What happened at the Blackwood Mine in the autumn of 1923 has been systematically erased from public records, mentioned only in hushed tones by elderly residents who refuse to speak after sundown. The disappearance of 27 miners and the subsequent abandonment of an entire town represents more than just another tragic industrial accident. It bears all the hallmarks of something deliberately concealed. According to county archives accessed in 1965, the Blackwood Mining Company established operations in 1917, quickly becoming the economic center of the region. The company's rapid success attracted workers from across the state and neighboring Kentucky, a prosperity that seemed almost too perfect. Local newspaper clippings from the Welch Daily News describe the mine's owner, Augustus Blackwood, as a gentleman of impeccable business acumen and generous community spirit. These accounts paint a picture of a model company town, well-maintained company houses, a company store with fair prices, and working conditions that were described as humane by industry standards. Yet later investigations would reveal inconsistencies in these glowing reports. What's particularly notable about Augustus Blackwood is how little was known about him before his arrival in West Virginia. Business registration documents located in the state archives list his previous residence as various European capitals, with no specific details. His naturalization papers, filed hastily in 1916, contain numerous inconsistencies and list his country of origin alternately as Austria and Switzerland, depending on which page one examines. Most curious is his listed profession: geological engineer with specialization in unique mineral extraction. This vague description would later take on more ominous implications. Photographs of Blackwood are surprisingly scarce for such a prominent businessman of the era. The few that exist show a tall, gaunt man with deep-set eyes and an unusually rigid posture. Former residents interviewed decades later consistently described his appearance in strikingly similar terms. He stood too straight, like there was something wrong with his spine, and his hands were always cold like he'd been keeping them in ice water. Perhaps most telling was the observation that he never seemed comfortable in daylight, always wore tinted glasses and a wide-brimmed hat, even indoors. Said he had a condition? The first indication that something was amiss appeared in an obscure medical examiner's report dated January the 1922. Dr. Elias Harmon noted an unusual pattern among miners. The patient exhibits symptoms inconsistent with typical mining-related ailments, marked pallor, unexplained weight loss, and a peculiar form of anemia not attributable to poor diet or working conditions. The report was filed but never followed up on. When interviewed in 1963, Dr. Harmon's widow claimed that her husband had been pressured to classify these cases as routine mining fatigue. According to Mrs. Harmon, her husband began keeping a separate private medical journal after his official reports were repeatedly altered before being filed with the county. This journal, discovered among Dr. Harmon's effects after his death in 1948, contains disturbing observations about the miners' conditions. The affected individuals all worked in the same section of the mine, the newest tunnel, which Mr. Blackwood had designated as a special project. Their symptoms begin with insomnia and progress to an almost manic alertness, followed by periods of catatonia-like stillness where the patient appears to be listening to something inaudible to others. In the final stages, they develop an extreme sensitivity to sound and light, keeping their homes in total darkness and speaking only in whispers, if at all. The journal ends abruptly in September 1923 with a troubling entry. Blackwood visited today. He knows I've been documenting the cases separately. Offered me a position as the company's exclusive physician at triple my current salary. When I hesitated, his manner changed. Said my records contained dangerous speculations and that continued public discussion would constitute a breach of national security. He mentioned my daughter by name and asked if she was still attending the school on Maple Street. I've accepted his offer. Archived photographs from the town's peak show rows of identical houses facing the mine entrance. According to architectural assessments conducted by Holland's college researchers in 1961, the home contained an unusually extensive basement system that extended partially into the hillside, with corridors that, as one researcher noted, seemed designed for purposes beyond simple storage. The Holland's report describes peculiar features of the basement: walls lined with a dense, sound-dampening material not commonly used in residential construction, a ventilation system far more elaborate than necessary for a private home, and most strangely, a room described as a chamber with walls, floor, and ceiling entirely composed of copper plating containing only a chair bolted to the center of the floor facing a wall of undetermined purpose. The house had been stripped of most furnishings before the researchers gained access, but they noted heavy brackets on the walls where equipment had clearly once been mounted. What's notable is the architectural anomaly of the Blackwood residence itself, a Victorian mansion built on the hillside overlooking both the mine and the town. The Appalachian Journal of Regional History published a brief article in 1959 citing local postal records that revealed an unusual pattern of correspondence between Augustus Blackwood and several European medical research facilities between 1919 and 1923. The nature of these communications was never disclosed, as the actual letters were reportedly destroyed in a post office fire in 1931. The timing of this fire has been called suspicious by several investigators, particularly as it occurred the night before a scheduled visit by a federal postal inspector. What survived, however, was a log book showing that Blackwood received regular shipments from the Heidelberg University Institute of Experimental Medicine, the Vienna Academy of Sciences, and most frequently from a Swiss facility identified only as Institut der Besonderen Forschung, the Institute of Special Research. No records of an institution by this name have ever been located despite extensive inquiries by later researchers. Census records show that by mid-1923, the town's population had grown to 837 residents. By December of that same year, official records indicated only 612 residents remained. The significant population decrease was attributed to a migration due to economic downturn in company documents. However, train station records from neighboring towns showed no corresponding influx of former Blackwood miners or their families. Bus terminals reported no unusual increase in departures. Most tellingly, the surrounding communities reported no new arrivals seeking work or housing during this period, as if 225 people had simply vanished from the region entirely. One resident who did relocate, however, left behind a valuable account. Martha Kingsley, whose husband James worked as a surveyor for the mining company, moved to Pittsburgh in early 1924. In 1962, her daughter provided researchers with a journal Martha had kept during her time in Welch. The entries from September and October 1923 describe increasing tension in the town. September 8, 1923. James came home late again. Says Mr. Blackwood has them mapping a new section of the mine, deeper than they've gone before. Says it's the strangest rock formation he's ever seen. Not coal at all, but something else. When I asked what, he just shook his head and said Mr. Blackwood had them all sign papers saying they wouldn't discuss it. He looks tired all the time now. September 17, 1923. The Miller boy is sick with the same thing the Hendersons had last month, that pale, wasting look. Mrs. Miller says he wakes up screaming about tapping sounds in the walls. Dr. Harmon prescribed the same pills he's giving everyone now. They don't seem to help. October 2nd, 1923. James hasn't spoken in 3 days. Just sits by the window after work, staring toward the mine entrance. When I try to talk to him, he puts his finger to his lips and shakes his head. At night, he whispers in his sleep, "They're listening. They're always listening." Her final entry, dated October 15, 1923, 2 days before the snowstorm, is the most disturbing. Men from the company came today. They wore some kind of protective suits, like rubber, but thicker. They took James away in a covered truck with 4 other men from his survey team. Said it was just for observation at the company infirmary, but they didn't let them take anything, not even a change of clothes. When I asked when he'd be back, the man just stared at me and said, "That depends on what they found down there." Mr. Blackwood was with them, wearing a strange metal device around his neck. He wouldn't look directly at me. The pivotal event occurred on October 17, 1923. According to a weather station report from nearby Bluefield, an unseasonably early snowstorm had isolated the town for 3 days. When communication was re-established, mine operations had ceased entirely. The company's official statement, printed in the Welch Daily News on October 23rd, cited a catastrophic structural failure in the main shaft. No casualties were reported, a statistical improbability given the nature of such accidents and the number of men who would have been working at the time. What makes this case particularly disturbing are the inconsistencies in official accounts. County death records from this period show no spike in fatalities, yet the mine, which had been the town's economic lifeblood, never reopened. More telling is that within 6 months, nearly half the town's remaining population had relocated, leaving homes fully furnished behind them. When questioned about this mass exodus decades later, former residents exhibited what one psychologist described as selective amnesia regarding specific details of their departure. A telegraph operator from nearby Iager, Howard Brennan, provided a compelling account to investigators in 1960. He claimed that on October 18, 1923, during the height of the supposed snowstorm, he received an urgent message for transmission to Washington, D.C. The sender was Augustus Blackwood, and the message requested immediate federal intervention for containment of situation beyond local resources. According to Brennan, the reply came within hours, not from any civilian agency, but from an Army colonel, whose name Brennan couldn't recall. The message authorized deployment of specialist team and implementation of Protocol 17. Brennan further stated that within 12 hours, a train carrying what appeared to be military personnel arrived in Iager, where they were met by Blackwood's associates and transported toward Welch by truck. When researchers attempted to verify this account through military archives, they found that all Army deployment records for that region during October 1923 had been classified under an executive order signed by President Coolidge. The order itself has never been declassified. In 1947, a land survey commissioned by the state revealed something that contradicts the official narrative of a collapsed mine. The survey notes indicate that, while surface structures show expected deterioration, subsurface scans suggest the main shaft remains largely intact, though sealed with what appears to be a deliberate concrete barrier approximately 200 feet from the entrance. This finding was excluded from the final published report, but was discovered in field notes archived at West Virginia University in 1962. The surveyor, Robert Campbell, added a personal note to his official report that was similarly omitted from the published version. Encountered unusual difficulties with equipment near the mine entrance. Compass needles spin erratically within 50 yards of the sealed shaft. 2 survey team members reported severe headaches, and 1 experienced sudden nosebleeds while working in proximity to the site. Most concerning was the behavior of the local guide, who refused to approach closer than 100 yards to the entrance, claiming, "That ground is poisoned now. Has been since they sealed whatever they found down there." When pressed for clarification, he would only say, Some things should stay buried, and some mountains should be left alone. Augustus Blackwood himself becomes a central mystery in this narrative. County records show he maintained ownership of the property until his death in 1951, though he was reportedly never again seen in McDowell County after November 1923. His death certificate, issued in Switzerland, lists natural causes, yet no specific ailment is mentioned. More curious is the stipulation in his will that the mine property remain undisturbed and unoccupied in perpetuity, with a substantial trust established to ensure this condition was met. Financial records uncovered by a Pittsburgh Post-Gazette investigation in 1957 revealed that Blackwood's wealth increased dramatically after the mine's closure, a counterintuitive outcome for someone whose primary business had supposedly failed. The source of this sudden prosperity was attributed to European investments and patents, though no specific patents bearing his name have ever been located in U.S. or European records. Bank transfers show regular payments from an entity identified only as Department W, with no further clarification of what this organization might be. In the spring of 1958, Dr. Margaret Holloway, an industrial archaeologist from the University of Pennsylvania, sought permission to study the abandoned mining town as part of her research on early 20th century Appalachian industrial communities. Her initial request to the trust managing the property was denied. After appealing directly to the State Historical Society, she was granted limited access to the town site, but was explicitly forbidden from approaching the mine entrance. Dr. Holloway's field journals, made available to researchers in 1964, describe an eerie preservation of the site. The town appears to have been abandoned in haste. Homes contain personal effects that one would expect residents to take: family photographs, heirlooms, items of obvious sentimental and monetary value. The company store's ledger remains open on the counter, the last entry dated October 16, 1923, one day before the snowstorm. Most disturbing was her discovery in the basement of the company medical office. Hidden beneath a false floor, she uncovered a locked metal box containing what appeared to be medical records. These documents detailed treatment protocols for miners suffering from the previously mentioned unusual symptoms. The records used medical terminology inconsistent with standard practices of the time and referenced experimental procedures. Dr. Holloway noted that several pages appeared to have been removed, and many passages were written in a numeric code she was unable to decipher. One legible section described a progression of symptoms following exposure to what was referred to only as the material. Initial contact produces mild euphoria and heightened sensory awareness. Secondary phase, 2 to 3 weeks post-exposure, manifests as auditory sensitivity, particularly to frequencies between 15 to 20 Hz. Tertiary phase, 4 to 6 weeks, involves development of what appears to be a sympathetic nervous response to proximate samples of the material. Subjects can apparently sense its presence, even when blindfolded. Final phase remains unclear. Subjects become non-communicative, but exhibit signs of responding to stimuli undetectable to non-exposed individuals. A separate document, which Dr. Holloway photographed but which was later confiscated from her belongings, contained a map of the mine with certain tunnels marked in red. These tunnels extended far deeper than would be practical for coal extraction and appeared to converge on a chamber marked only with a symbol, a circle containing a vertical line bisected by 3 horizontal lines. This symbol has never been identified in any known mining or geological classification system. During her 3rd week of research, Dr. Holloway reported unusual phenomena that she initially attributed to the psychological effects of working alone in an abandoned town. The sensation of being observed is constant. More concerning are the sounds emanating from the direction of the sealed mine. Rhythmic tapping that follows no discernible pattern yet seems deliberately communicative. I've set up recording equipment but have captured nothing, suggesting either equipment failure or my own auditory hallucinations. Her notes from the following day show increasing distress. Woke at 3:17 a.m. to what sounded like someone whispering directly outside my tent. The voice was too low to make out words, but the cadence was unnaturally regular, like recitation rather than conversation. When I emerged to investigate, I found nothing, but the ground where the sound had come from felt warm to the touch, despite the night being quite cold. I've collected soil samples from the area. On the final day of her scheduled research period, Dr. Holloway's field notes abruptly end mid-sentence. The soil analysis shows elevated levels of an unidentified metallic compound. More alarming is the faint luminescence it exhibited when I examined it in darkness. I'm convinced now that something in this area is producing effects on my perception. The tapping sounds have become constant now and seem to follow a pattern that almost resembles. The journal ends here. A search party found her equipment and vehicle still at the site, but no trace of the researcher herself. The official report concluded she had likely fallen into one of the many unmarked ventilation shafts that dotted the forested areas around the mine. Her body was never recovered, and the case was closed within a month, an unusually swift resolution for a disappearance under such circumstances. Dr. Holloway's university colleague, Professor Alan Whitman, expressed skepticism about this explanation in a letter to the Charleston Gazette. Margaret was methodical to a fault and would never have wandered near unstable ground without proper precautions. More concerning is the fact that her soil samples and most of her photographic negatives were removed from her effects before they were returned to the university. When I inquired about these items, I was told they had been damaged during transport and disposed of as a biohazard. No explanation was offered for why soil samples would constitute a biohazard. Professor Whitman himself traveled to Welch 3 months after Holloway's disappearance, but found the entire area cordoned off by state police, who cited environmental contamination concerns as the reason for restricted access. When he attempted to file a Freedom of Information Act request for documents related to this supposed contamination, he was informed that the records fell under national security exemptions. In 1960, following public pressure regarding Dr. Holloway's disappearance, the state authorized a limited investigation of the Blackwood site. The resulting report described the mine entrance as permanently sealed with reinforced concrete of unusual thickness. Ground-penetrating radar revealed extensive tunnel systems extending far beyond what had been indicated on any official mining maps. Perhaps most significantly, the radar detected several large chambers at depths far greater than would be typical for coal extraction operations. The investigation was abruptly terminated when 3 members of the research team developed severe respiratory issues and had to be hospitalized. Their symptoms matched those described in Dr. Harmon's medical reports from 1922. Dr. Carolyn Werner, a geologist with the U.S. Geological Survey who participated in the aborted investigation, later shared her observations privately with colleagues at a 1963 conference. According to attendees, she described finding anomalous rock formations that appeared to have been deliberately altered through application of extreme heat, far beyond what would occur in normal mining operations. She also mentioned discovering fragments of what seemed to be specialized equipment near the sealed entrance, components unlike anything used in standard mining, more resembling laboratory apparatus, including what appeared to be parts of a radiation shield, though significantly modified from conventional designs. Most intriguing was her description of a partial document recovered from what had been the mine superintendent's office, a logbook with entries tracking something referred to only as resonance levels. The final entries showed exponential increases in these measurements, accompanied by notations indicating concern. The last entry, dated October 16, 1923, contained only the words, "Containment failure imminent, Protocol 17 authorized." Dr. Werner reportedly resigned from the USGS shortly after the conference and relocated to New Zealand, refusing all further contact with former colleagues. A former miner named Elijah Sullivan, interviewed for an oral history project in 1963, provided one of the few first-hand accounts of working conditions at Blackwood. Sullivan, who was 78 at the time of the interview, spoke of a section of the mine referred to by workers as the quiet zone, a deep portion of the shaft where no one was permitted to speak. Mr. Blackwood had special rules for that section: no talkin', no lamps brighter than a candle, and never make noise with your tools. Some men got fired just for coughing too loud down there. When pressed about what was being mined in this section, Sullivan became visibly agitated and refused to continue the interview. When contacted for a follow-up interview the following week, Sullivan's daughter informed researchers that he had suffered a stroke the night after the initial conversation and could no longer speak. Medical records obtained with the family's permission showed no previous history of cardiovascular issues. The attending physician noted in his report that Sullivan exhibited unusual symptoms alongside the stroke, including auditory hallucinations and extreme photosensitivity, requiring his hospital room to be kept in near total darkness. The Blackwood case intersects with another regional mystery from the same period. Between 1921 and 1924, neighboring counties reported an unusual number of disappearances, primarily individuals who lived alone in remote areas. Local law enforcement attributed these cases to migration or animal attacks, but journalist Edwin Carter, writing for the Pittsburgh Courier in 1958, noted a disturbing pattern. Many of the disappeared had reportedly been approached by well-dressed men offering high-paying work at an unnamed mining operation just before they vanished. Carter's investigation revealed another connection. Several of the disappeared had worked previously as medical personnel, geological specialists, or had military backgrounds in specialized engineering. This selective pattern suggests recruitment rather than random disappearances. Most telling was Carter's discovery of payroll records from the Blackwood Company, showing several of these missing individuals briefly employed as special consultants in the months before the mine's closure, though no specific duties were listed. After publishing his initial findings, Carter reported being followed by unmarked vehicles and receiving anonymous threatening phone calls. His editor at the Courier received a visit from individuals claiming to represent the Federal Bureau of Investigation, who advised against continuing the series due to possible implications for national security. The planned 5-part investigation was discontinued after just 2 articles. Carter himself relocated to Canada in 1959, where he worked as a high school teacher until his death in 1964. His personal papers, which reportedly included extensive notes on the Blackwood case, were scheduled to be donated to the University of Toronto Library, but disappeared while in transit. In the summer of 1961, a team of geology students from Virginia Tech conducted unauthorized soil samples around the perimeter of the Blackwood property. Their analysis revealed trace elements inconsistent with the region's typical mineral composition, including unusual concentrations of rare earth metals. More alarming was the presence of chemical compounds that, according to their professor, appeared synthetic in nature and potentially toxic. When these findings were submitted to the State Environmental Agency, the students were threatened with legal action for trespassing, and their samples were confiscated. Dr. James Harrington, the faculty advisor for the student project, later published a carefully worded paper in the Journal of Appalachian Geology describing theoretical anomalies that might exist in certain deep coal formations. While never directly referencing Blackwood, the paper contained a coded message in its apparently random selection of geological sites used as examples. When the first letter of each site is extracted, they spell Blackwood contains non-terrestrial matter EAAL. Harrington took a sabbatical immediately following the paper's publication and did not return to his position, instead accepting a research post at an observatory in Chile. Perhaps the most compelling evidence that something beyond a mining accident occurred at Blackwood comes from meteorological records. The snowstorm that isolated the town in October 1923 appears in weather station logs from Bluefield and Charleston. However, as noted by meteorologist Dr. Harold Winters, in a 1964 journal article, "The reported storm exhibits characteristics inconsistent with typical Appalachian weather patterns for that season." He further observed that temperature readings and barometric pressure recordings suggested conditions for snow existed only in a remarkably localized area, specifically over Welch and its immediate surroundings. Dr. Winters hypothesized some form of localized atmospheric anomaly, though he offered no explanation for what might cause such a phenomenon. Dr. Winters' research assistant, Matthew Collins, shared additional information with a colleague at the National Weather Service in a personal letter discovered in 2017. Collins wrote, "What Dr. Winters couldn't include in the publication was the radiation reading taken by a military aircraft that apparently flew over the area during the snowstorm. The document was shown to us by a government official who visited the lab after hearing about our research. According to this reading, the area exhibited radiation levels consistent with what we now associate with particle accelerator operations, technology that didn't exist, at least publicly, in 1923. Interviews conducted by folklore researchers from Marshall University in 1962 found that survivors who had relocated exhibited similar speech patterns when discussing Blackwood. Specifically, they tended to repeat certain phrases verbatim, such as, "The mine closed due to economic factors," and "We left seeking better opportunities." When questioned about specific events or individuals, many displayed what the researchers termed artificial memory gaps, an inability to recall details that would normally be memorable while maintaining clear memories of unrelated events from the same period. The official confiscated our copies of the weather station logs after showing us this document. The few remaining personal accounts from former residents share consistent elements that suggest a coordinated effort to conceal information. One interviewee, who requested anonymity, broke this pattern briefly when the recording equipment malfunctioned during his session. According to the interviewer's notes, the elderly man leaned forward and whispered, "They made us forget. Gave us shots they said were for typhoid, but afterward, things got blurry. I remember the sounds, though, coming up from below, like something tapping on the inside of the world, wanting to get out. And Blackwood standing there with that thing around his neck, listening to it like he understood what it was saying." When the recording equipment was repaired and the interview resumed, the man reverted to the same standardized responses given by other former residents and denied making his previous statement. In 1964, historian Dr. Rebecca Chambers discovered a series of telegraph communications between Augustus Blackwood and federal officials in Washington, dated October 18, 1923, immediately following the reported mine collapse. The content of these telegrams had been heavily redacted, but Dr. Chambers noted that several references remained to containment protocols and specialized personnel with clearance level alpha. Her requests for the complete documents were denied, and shortly after publishing a preliminary paper on her findings, her university position was eliminated due to what was described as budget restructuring. Before leaving her position, Dr. Chambers confided in a graduate student about a document she had found in the National Archives, a requisition form for military equipment to be delivered to McDowell County in October 1923. The list included items that seemed inappropriate for a mining accident response: lead-lined containment vessels, radiation detection equipment that was experimental for the time, and, most puzzlingly, sound-dampening barriers capable of blocking frequencies below human hearing threshold. The student later reported that when he attempted to locate this document using the reference number provided by Dr. Chambers, he was informed no such record existed. A potentially related document emerged during a 1967 congressional inquiry into government transparency. A partial transcript of a closed 1924 meeting between the Secretary of War and the Secretary of the Interior referenced the Appalachian incident and included the statement, "President Coolidge has been briefed on the full containment procedure and concurs that no public disclosure is compatible with national interests." The material has been secured and transported to the special facility discussed previously. Ongoing monitoring of affected personnel continues to show the expected deterioration pattern. The final documented investigation into the Blackwood case came in 1965 when documentary filmmaker Thomas Pearson attempted to record oral histories from the few living former residents. His interview subjects initially agreed to participate, but withdrew consent almost simultaneously within days of his arrival in the area. Local accommodations suddenly became unavailable to him, and he reported being followed by unmarked vehicles. After his recording equipment was stolen from his locked car, Pearson abandoned the project. In a letter to a colleague, he wrote, "Something still exerts influence here. The fear isn't of something that happened 40 years ago. It's immediate and present. These people aren't afraid of speaking about the past. They're afraid of what might happen to them now if they do." Pearson did manage to record one interview before his equipment was taken. The subject was Catherine Mills, whose grandfather had worked as an accountant for the Blackwood Company. He described one as a box that listens to stones and another as a cabinet with more switches than a telephone exchange. The invoices didn't come from mining supply companies but from university laboratories, and one place grandfather called a government workshop without a name. Most tellingly, she recalled her grandfather describing a conversation overheard between Blackwood and an unidentified visitor. The man asked, "How deep did you have to go to find it?" And Blackwood answered, "Not deep enough." While she had no direct experience with the mine, she shared a strange story passed down in her family. Grandfather said that in September 1923, Blackwood ordered special equipment, not mining equipment, but scientific instruments. It was waiting for us. Grandfather said the way he spoke those words made his blood run cold. The land where Blackwood once stood remains uninhabited to this day. Aerial photographs from a 1968 geographical survey show the gradual reclamation of the site by forest, with only the faint outlines of streets and foundations visible. The mine entrance itself, according to the survey notes, appears to have been further reinforced and camouflaged with local vegetation. A park ranger who patrolled the broader region in the late 1960s reported in his log an unusual observation about the Blackwood area. Wildlife avoids a circular zone approximately 1 mile in diameter centered on the old mine entrance. No birds nest there, no animals den there, not even insects seem to reside in this area. The vegetation grows but appears subtly different from the surrounding forest, less vibrant somehow, as though growing in soil that lacks some essential nutrient. What actually happened at the Blackwood mine? The fragmentary evidence suggests possibilities far more disturbing than a simple industrial accident or economic failure. The medical anomalies, the inconsistent records, the enforced silence, and the continued restriction of the site all point to a deliberate cover-up of something found deep within the Appalachian Mountains, something that perhaps should have remained buried. In 1966, a former Department of Interior employee, speaking anonymously to the Charleston Gazette, claimed that certain mining operations in Appalachia during the 1920s had uncovered geological anomalies of potential national security concern. When asked to elaborate, he would only say that some things extracted from the earth aren't always minerals or fuel. An internal memo from the Department of Energy, declassified in 1988 but largely overlooked, contains a reference that may connect to the Blackwood incident. In a section discussing the security classifications of various materials, it mentions substance B7R, first catalogued 1923, origin site remains classified. Properties include anomalous electromagnetic effects and possible psychological impact on proximate personnel. The designation B7R appears nowhere else in publicly available government documents. A researcher attempting to follow up on this reference in 1990 submitted a Freedom of Information Act request for any materials related to substance B7R and received a curious response. Rather than the standard denial used for classified materials, the reply stated, The subject of your inquiry falls under Executive Order 11-52, Special Category Exclusion. No confirmation or denial of the existence of such material can be provided. Please be advised that continued inquiry into this matter may constitute a violation of national security protocols. The Blackwood case file was officially sealed by court order in 1969, with access restricted for a period of 75 years. The stated reason was protection of proprietary mining techniques and trade secrets, an unusual justification for a mine that had been closed for over 4 decades. The sealing order was signed by a federal judge who, records show, had no previous connection to the case or jurisdiction over the area in question. More telling still, the order was issued 1 day after the death of the last known surviving miner who had worked in the quiet zone. Those who have hiked the remote trails near the former town site report an unnatural silence in the area. No bird song, no insect sounds, no rustling of wildlife in the underbrush. Local hunters avoid the region entirely, claiming animals do the same. One longtime resident of nearby Ayagir, interviewed in 1967, offered perhaps the most chilling observation. There's places where the ground don't feel right under your feet, like it's hollow, but more than that, like what's under there ain't just empty space. And on certain nights, when the air is still, you can hear something from the direction of that old mine. Not coming from inside it, mind you, but like it's answering something inside it. A geology professor from West Virginia University who conducted an unauthorized magnetometer survey of the area in 1971 reported findings so anomalous that his equipment manufacturer initially claimed the device must be malfunctioning. The readings suggest a massive metallic mass approximately 200 feet below the surface, far deeper than any coal seam would be worked. More concerning is that repeated readings taken over a 24-hour period showed subtle but measurable shifts in the mass's position, as though it were adjusting itself. His request for funding to conduct a more thorough investigation was denied, and his preliminary findings were removed from university archives in 1973. In 1975, a hunter who had ventured close to the restricted area was hospitalized with unusual symptoms: severe headaches, auditory hallucinations, and extreme sensitivity to light. His medical chart, obtained by researchers in 1986, contained a notation from the attending physician. Patient exhibits symptoms consistent with acute radiation exposure, though no known source exists in the area he described. Of particular concern are his auditory hallucinations, which he claims are not voices, but mechanical sounds and rhythmic tapping that form patterns almost like speech. The hunter recovered physically but remained convinced he had heard something intelligent trying to communicate from underground. He reportedly never again set foot in the woods. The most telling aspect of the Blackwood mystery may be how completely it has been erased from public consciousness. Despite the unusual circumstances, the suspicious timing, the missing persons, and the continued restriction of the site, the case appears in no major historical accounts of Appalachian mining disasters or West Virginia history. FOIA requests regarding the site are routinely denied, citing exemptions related to national security, an extraordinary classification for what is officially recorded as a failed coal mine from the 1920s. In 1982, a retired military officer who claimed to have been part of a containment team sent a series of anonymous letters to several major newspapers. None published the content, but copies obtained from the officer's estate after his death contained disturbing allegations. What we contained at Blackwood wasn't a mining disaster, but something they found down there, something that affected the miners' minds before it affected their bodies. The brass called it a cognitive pathogen, said it changed how people perceived reality, and in doing so, changed reality itself somehow. They were terrified it would spread beyond the isolated location. We sealed it with more than concrete. We used experimental materials designed to block certain types of radiation, and, strangest of all, sound frequencies that the scientists said might resonate with the material. The retired officer's letters went on to describe an operation far beyond what would be expected for a mining accident. We established a perimeter and processed everyone who had been within a mile of the mine entrance. They were given injections that one of the doctors said would create selective memory gaps, some kind of early truth serum combined with compounds I'd never heard of. Those who had worked directly with the material were taken to a facility I was not cleared to know about. I never saw any of them again. Perhaps most disturbing was his description of what happened to the material itself. They didn't destroy it. They couldn't or wouldn't. I overheard one scientist tell another that it's potentially the most significant discovery in human history. They extracted samples in lead-lined containers, each sealed with what looked like silver locks inscribed with symbols I didn't recognize. The convoy that transported these containers had more security than the president. His final letter contained an ominous warning. They still monitor the site. Every few years, they send in teams with equipment that gets more sophisticated each time. They're checking if the seal is holding. The last time I was involved in 1947, one of the technicians said readings suggested it's still active down there, and possibly growing. Whatever is sealed in that mine isn't dead. It's waiting. While these letters cannot be independently verified, they align with other evidence suggesting the Blackwood incident involved more than just a mining accident. Government budget records from 1924 to 1930 show regular allocations to a project codenamed Resonance Control, with funding coming jointly from the War Department and the Bureau of Mines, an unusual collaboration for that era. These allocations continued annually until 1941, when the project designation changes to simply Site R Maintenance, with funding transferred entirely to military oversight. A local newspaper article from 1953 briefly mentioned that the area around the former mining town had been purchased by the federal government for conservation purposes, despite having no particular ecological significance. The same article noted that security personnel regularly patrol the area, though no valuable resources remain to justify such measures. In 1957, during the height of the Cold War, activity around the site reportedly increased. Residents of nearby communities described military vehicles moving along the overgrown roads leading to Blackwood and aircraft flying low over the area at night. A clerk at the county records office told researchers in 1964 that men in military uniforms had removed all maps showing the exact location of the mine entrance from public archives, replacing them with versions that showed the area as topographically unremarkable forest land. One persistent report comes from a local man who claimed to have been hired as a guide by government personnel in 1959. According to his account, shared with a local historian in 1968, he led a team of scientists with military escorts to the sealed mine entrance. They set up equipment all around the concrete seal, listening devices, Geiger counters, and things I couldn't identify. They worked mostly at night and spoke in technical terms, but I gathered they were measuring something coming from inside the mine. One night, all their equipment started going haywire at once. One of the scientists got real pale and said, "It's responding to our presence." They packed up within an hour and were gone before dawn. The historian who recorded this testimony noted that the man appeared genuinely frightened even years after the event and insisted on remaining anonymous out of fear of government reprisal. "Whatever they found in that mine," he reportedly said, "it ain't something that coal miners dug up. It's something that was already there, maybe for a long time, just waiting for somebody to dig deep enough." A curious footnote to the Blackwood mystery emerged in 1964 when a manuscript was submitted to a small publishing house specializing in scientific journals. The paper, titled Theoretical Models for Nonstandard Matter Interactions, was credited to an A. Blackwood with no institutional affiliation. The publisher's records show the manuscript was forwarded to several physicists for peer review. All recommended against publication, with one reviewer noting, The mathematics are beyond current theoretical frameworks, and the implications, if this model were valid, would upend our understanding of matter itself. The manuscript was returned to the sender, but the address proved to be a vacant lot in Baltimore. The content of this manuscript remained unknown until 1986, when the publishing house's archives were donated to a university library. A graduate student cataloging the collection found the peer reviewer's notes, which described the paper as proposing a form of matter that exists in a state of quantum superposition with its environment, potentially capable of influencing organic neural systems through mechanisms analogous to quantum entanglement. One reviewer had scrawled in the margin, "If this is more than theoretical, God help us." The author seems to be describing a form of conscious, manipulative matter. The manuscript itself was missing from the archives, with a note indicating it had been removed by government request in 1965. Attempts to locate copies of the peer reviews have been unsuccessful, as all three reviewing physicists died under various circumstances between 1965 and 1967, two from apparent natural causes and one in a house fire that destroyed all his personal papers. The geographic isolation of the Blackwood site makes it difficult to investigate today. The area appears on modern maps as part of a wildlife management area closed to public access. Satellite imagery shows only unbroken forest with no visible structures or roads. However, high-resolution thermal imaging from a 1997 USGS survey reveals an anomaly, a perfectly circular area approximately 1 mile in diameter, where ground temperatures are consistently 3 to 5 degrees cooler than the surrounding forest. This cold spot is centered on what would have been the mine entrance, based on historical maps. In 2007, a group of hikers who had ventured into the restricted area reported an unsettling experience. According to their account, posted anonymously on an online forum, they began to feel disoriented as they approached what they believed was the former town site. "We all got splitting headaches at about the same time. The GPS started showing impossible coordinates, jumping around like it couldn't fix our position. Most disturbing was the silence. Not just quiet, but a complete absence of sound, like the air itself was deadened. We turned back, but for hours afterward, we all heard the same thing, a faint tapping sound that seemed to follow us, always just at the edge of hearing." The hikers reported that upon returning home, they discovered their digital cameras contained no usable images from the restricted area, just frames of solid black or distorted static. More concerning was their claim that for weeks afterward, they experienced identical dreams of a dark chamber deep underground, where something was trying to speak without words. A declassified NSA document from 1978, obtained through a FOIA request related to an unconnected case, contains a single reference that may relate to Blackwood. In a section discussing unusual signal patterns, it mentions, "The WV anomaly continues to emit non-random sequences on the monitored frequencies." Latest analysis confirms previous assessment that these constitute a form of communication rather than natural phenomena. Recommendation: continued isolation and no attempts at direct response per established protocols. In 1998, a geophysicist conducted airborne surveys of the Appalachian region for a university research project. When his flight path crossed over the approximate location of Blackwood, his equipment registered what he later described as a gravitational anomaly inconsistent with known geological formations. His request to conduct ground-based follow-up research was denied by both university administrators and federal land management officials. In a letter to a colleague, he wrote, "The density readings suggest a mass far greater than should be present at that depth, and with properties unlike surrounding rock formations. More puzzling is that the mass appears to shift position slightly between successive scans, something that should be physically impossible for a geological formation." Perhaps the most disturbing contemporary account comes from a forest ranger who patrolled the broader region until his retirement in 2011. In an oral history recorded for a local historical society, he described his one and only venture near the Blackwood site early in his career. I was new and didn't know that area was unofficially off-limits to even ranger patrols. I hiked in about a mile past the old markers and started feeling wrong. Not sick exactly, but like my thoughts weren't entirely my own. There was this pressure, like something pushing against my mind, he continued. Then I started hearing it, a tapping sound coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. It had a pattern to it, almost like Morse code, but more complex. The longer I listened, the more I felt I could almost understand it, which makes no sense. I got out of there fast, but that night, I woke up writing symbols I'd never seen before. My wife said I'd been muttering in my sleep in what sounded like another language. The ranger reported the incident to his supervisor, who immediately reassigned him to a different area. He wasn't surprised, said they get a report like mine every few years when someone wanders too close. Said there's a standing order to report such incidents, not to the Forest Service, but to some special department number he had. I called it, and within an hour, 2 men in civilian clothes were interviewing me. They recorded everything, took the paper with the symbols I'd drawn, and told me I'd likely experienced hallucinations caused by a toxic fungus in that area. Gave me some pills just in case. I took one and slept for nearly 24 hours. When I woke up, the memory of the symbols was gone, though I still remembered the experience itself. The most recent documented incident related to the Blackwood site occurred in 2015, when a geological survey team from a major energy company was assessing the region for potential natural gas reserves. Their equipment detected what they initially thought was a large underground cavity potentially suitable for gas accumulation. When they attempted to take core samples, their drilling equipment failed repeatedly at approximately the same depth. An engineer with the team later shared his experience anonymously on a professional forum. The drill bits didn't break, they were consumed, as if the rock itself was somehow eating the metal. When we examined the partial cores we did retrieve, the composition made no sense. Elements arranged in molecular structures that our lab said were theoretically impossible. Then we started experiencing equipment failures, first the communications gear, then anything with a circuit board. The project supervisor received a visit from federal officials the next day, and the entire operation was shut down under some environmental protection clause none of us had ever heard of. He added one final observation that echoes reports from decades earlier. The night before we left, we all heard it, a rhythmic tapping from underground, like something was signaling to us. One of our geologists, who knew Morse code, said it wasn't random, but he couldn't decipher it. We recorded it, but when we played it back later, the recording contained only static. The company ordered us all to sign additional NDAs specific to that site, and the core samples were confiscated by someone claiming to represent the USGS, though his ID looked military to me. What secrets remained buried in the sealed chambers of the Blackwood mine? What was Augustus Blackwood really extracting from beneath the Appalachian Mountains? And perhaps most disturbingly, given the reports of sound still emanating from the sealed entrance, could something still be active within those dark tunnels, waiting in the quiet zone where miners were forbidden to make a sound? The answers remain locked away, both in sealed government files and in the memories of those few surviving individuals who still refuse to speak of what they witnessed in that remote mountain town in the autumn of 1923. As with many of history's darkest chapters, we are left only with fragments and whispers, and the unsettling knowledge that some mysteries remain unsolved, not because the answers cannot be found, but because someone has determined they should not be. The hills of Appalachia hold many secrets. The Blackwood mine may be just one of them, but the systematic effort to erase it from history suggests it may be one of the most dangerous. In the silent forests of McDowell County, the past has not been forgotten. It has been deliberately buried, sealed away like the mine itself, behind concrete barriers meant to last for eternity. And yet, as locals still whisper, on certain nights when the wind blows from the east, You can stand on the ridge above where Welch once thrived and hear what sounds like rhythmic tapping coming from deep within the earth. A pattern without meaning, yet undeniably deliberate, as if something is still trying to communicate from behind those sealed doors. Something that has been waiting patiently in darkness for decades, marking time until the barriers weaken and what was contained can finally emerge once more into the light. A handwritten note found among the effects of the last trust manager for the Blackwood property after his death in 2018 offers perhaps the most chilling epitaph for this forgotten chapter of Appalachian history. Written in shaky script on a page torn from a journal, it reads simply, "It's still listening. All these years later, it's still listening. And it remembers every one of us who heard it calling." The Blackwood mine remains sealed, its secrets entombed behind concrete and classification orders. But if the fragmentary evidence and testimonies are to be believed, whatever was discovered in those deep tunnels in 1923 may not be as contained as official records suggest. In the deepest chambers of the Appalachian Mountains, something waits, something that thinks, that remembers, and that continues, year after year, decade after decade, to reach out through stone and earth with its rhythmic tapping, searching for new ears to hear its call. Some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again,